Hi everyone, it's Ryan from Ryan Plans. Today is another ink video. We are gonna do medium browns today. Let's get started. Last time I did go over the blacks, and then I also went over like the pigmented inks, and then we went through the dark brown inks right here. So today we are going to continue our ink exploration basically with the medium browns that I have. The first brown that we are going to do is Diamine's Rustic Brown. It's kind of this color right here, if you guys can see. I'll show you. So it's sort of like almost maroonish brown. It has a lot of reddish tone into it. So Diamines are fairly red inks. I found my book here. This was my ink testing book that I had. So I actually found this book. This was like a long time ago when I first got it. I did like write some of the stuff down here of all the inks that I got. So let's see if I can find that Rustic Brown here really quick. It's supposed to have a wet flow. It has a moderate dry time. It has a good shading. Now I did get this from Cult Pens. If you are in US, Cult Pen is actually from Europe. It's a lot cheaper to get Diamine inks from like European stores. So as long as you buy enough, then it would be pretty good as far as the shipping cost goes. But yeah, I did get a bunch of, like, I made a whole wish list and then I bought it all together. But I did get it from Cult Pens, which is a lot cheaper than getting it from US retailers. But anyway, that is the Diamine's Rustic Brown. Look how fast it dried. It already dried already. It already dried already? Okay. Okay. So next one is the Diamine Settle Brown. This one is more of that yellow toned brown. It's very generic brown. I'm sorry you guys, it's almost Independence Day, so there's fireworks and my dog is barking because of it. If you can see here, the Settle Brown, when you write it, this is how it looks like. It's more of like that muted brown, I would say. It says medium to dark brown ink, but it's really just like a pure brown ink, almost like if you like diluted out the chocolate milk with like lots of milk, then it becomes like that muted, you know, chocolate milk color. It's kind of like that kind of color. It does have a wet flow. It has a moderate dry time, moderate to good shading. I did find it that unless you use like a really thick nib, it doesn't have like amazing shading. It does have some, but it's not that great in terms of like compared to other brown inks. Okay, so moving on to the next ink is another Diamine ink. And this is the Roasted Chestnut. Now, if I remember it, I think this one is a blue. Yeah, it's a blue edition. So this one is, it used to be like a limited edition that they made into like that they have become like a regular ink, I would say. So why is it not saturated enough? There we go. As you can see, it's like a rich chestnut color actually. It is leaning slightly, ever so slightly red, but I would say it's a very warm reddish brown ink. It has a medium to wet flow. So the interesting thing is this one wasn't as wet as the other Diamine ink, but it's still pretty good enough with a moderate dry time, and it has a really good shading. So for the reference, the blue inks are only sold in 50 mils, I believe. So they are going to be a little bit more expensive. It comes in like a really nice glass jars instead of their like regular plastic ones. So it is a little bit more expensive, but presentation wise, it's a much nicer kind if you are into that kind of thing. This one is Blackstone's Brown Boronia. Now I remember this ink exactly because I bought it purely because it's supposed to be a scented ink. Now it's been a really long time and I haven't, this has been just sitting in my like a vial. It doesn't have like that pretty smell anymore, but I remember it was pretty like, it wasn't like amazing fragrance wise, but it was kind of interesting that the ink had some kind of like actual like fragrance in it. It is, as you guys can see, it's kind of like a lighter, like very like diluted kind of ink. It is fairly red ink, but not because it's very lubricated or it's like a high quality ink. I think they made it so that it's very watery just so that they can add a fragrance into it. It didn't really have like good shading or anything like that. It was just very like, I don't know, it was very basic kind of brown ink. But the only thing that was interesting was that it was a scented ink, and that was the whole reason why I got it. I ended up not really using it as much though, because like the quality wise I thought it was pretty subpar. So yeah, but if you are interested in that kind of like scented ink, I love fragrance, so I had to try it, but I wasn't really a big fan of it. And so next one, now I don't know if this is gonna be like, this should go in a medium brown or if it should go in like a red color, but this one is Diamine's Oxblood. Now I'm going to put it in the medium brown area, but I'm going to say this is fairly very red, like almost to the point where like it's not really brown, but you can say it's kind of in a brown area because it's not really red either. But anyway, as you guys can see, this is a pretty popular ink from Diamine. It is like very red, but then the thing is, if you consider this in a red spectrum, it's going to be like really dark and all like a bloody color. It really portrays that like kind of like a, you know, like that dark reddish, like a bloody color really well. But it's very saturated, so it's kind of like not really red but not really brown, kind of in between color. So I sometimes like to use this you know, along with my brown inks, and that is why I put it in here, but I think it's more of a red ink though. Okay, next one is very similar to Diamine's Oxblood. This is the Rubbert Austar's Estorquiza Rot. So I think it's kind of like a brick color. So again, not really brown, but sort of a little bit like a reddish toned. It's a little bit more orangey compared to the Oxblood. So it does look a little bit more brownish than obviously here, but they're both kind of like not in the orange or red field, but it can kind of pass as a brown, but not really, because it's not really like brown that we are like used to. But anyway, I think this is a pretty interesting ink. When I first tried it out, it does come out pretty red compared to other browns, but it just looks a little bit more orangey just because it's sitting right next to the Oxblood. So I think this is a pretty good comparison. So like compared to like other brown, like, I mean, this is a regular brown here, right? But if you look at here, I mean, these are pretty reddish brown, but this is more of like kind of in between sitting color, if you know what I mean. But anyway, as all the Rubbert Austar goes, in a thicker like stub nibs, they're fairly wet, have a really good flow. In like sailors, like a Japanese fine nibs, I find it to be not dry, but it's sort of like a medium. So they're not particularly wet ink, but it's not something like that you're gonna have trouble writing. Like some of the Lamy hat are really dry that I really don't like to write it with the Japanese like fine nib. But Rubbert Austar is like a pretty standard medium flow, like medium dry time, very like standard, I think. Okay, moving on. Next one is Urban's Cafe d'Ayers. Now this is one of Urban's kind of reddish brown ink, if I remember. Yeah, but it's sort of like a medium toned reddish brown. Very pretty color. I personally favor their lead tea color a little bit more than this one. This is fairly like a reddish color, reddish brown, very wet ink. It writes really well, just like any of the Urban inks. Urban inks are fairly like wet type of ink, but in terms of like the brand wise, very good quality. I really like it. I don't know why it looks so muted in here, but there we go. That's much better. This is more like how it looks. Yeah, so it's a little bit more like a darker, like this reddish brown. This is how I remember it. Yeah, but if you want like a really wet flow reddish brown, this is a really good one to try. Next one is Diamine's Ancient Copper. This is one of the bestseller as far as the brownings goes, I think, from Diamine. Everybody raves about this color. And it is like a reddish, medium toned brown. Now, I know, again, it's kind of hard to justify whether it's going to be sitting on a red spectrum or the brown, because as you guys can see, like you see how Cafe d'Ayers, this one is more like it is a true brown, but it's just reddish brown, right? Whereas Ancient Copper is kind of like sitting in between the brown and reds. So I think you could go either way. Compared to Oxblood, it's a little bit more like lighter color, and it's a little bit more orangey, kind of like a brownish compared to Oxblood. This one is a little bit more redder. And then this one is very interesting. It really is like that Ancient Copper. You know how it's like a copper color, but it's kind of like a darker copper, and it has that ancient feel because it's kind of like a reddish, orangish, kind of brownish kind of color. So anyway, it has a wet flow, pretty good medium dry time, I would say. It has a really good shading as well. So that is the Ancient Copper from Diamine. Next one is Rubbert Austar's Muddy Dragon. This is another of one of like the reddish brown, where it kind of sits in the middle. When they first released it, Rubbert Austar actually released like 5 or 6 of like different like muddy collections, where they there was like muddy, like something with like a blue, green, that kind of thing. This was the reddish brown sort of color. I thought it was very comparable to Ancient Copper. Now when I write it though, I think in like a writing, Muddy Dragon is a little bit more redder, whereas the Ancient Copper is a little bit more of that orangish brownish toned. So this one is a little bit redder than the Ancient Copper. So I would say Oxblood is really red, and then Muddy Dragon, and then Ancient Copper. And then I would say then Turquoise Rod is the next one. And then Cafe d'Ayers, like compared to this, it's really brown. But when you actually compare this to like a regular, like a medium toned brown, this is like really red. So that would be like how they are in terms of spectrum. The next one is my favorite ink, you guys. This is Denise Booker. This is like the perfect autumn time, like a fall, like leaves falling down, like that palette of the perfect autumn color. Look how pretty that is, you guys. Okay, so as I mentioned, it is like that full portrait of autumn color. I love to use it during the cooler months, but even in summer, like I just love using this one. It has a really good flow. It dries fairly good, like a medium drying time, but also it has a really pretty shading. And the color, I know like ancient copper is like a lot of people's favorite, but this one is to die for me personally. I absolutely love this color so much. This is my favorite like reddish toned brown color. Like I have never found any brown that was prettier than ochre. There are a lot of good medium browns like that is more like a reddish, but this is absolutely my top favorite. I've used this like a lot, and as you guys can see, it's such a pretty beautiful color. It just writes so well. Just can't say enough about it. Highly recommend this color. Next one is Urban's Lead the Tea. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's supposed to be like a tea leaves color. Now this is Urban's that medium brown color. It's again just like any other Urbans. It writes really wet, very pretty. Has a good medium drying time, and it has a really pretty shading. This would be like the perfect medium brown color if you want like a really wet flow from Urban ink. Now this is a really popular ink again. I personally prefer the Rubbert Austar's golden brown to Lead the Tea, just because I like how the Rubbert Austar shading ink looks compared to the Urban. But when you want to like compare it as far as like, you know, like how wet it writes, especially if you want to use like Japanese extra fine, you might want like a wetter ink, then Urban would be the one to go with. If it was like, if I was to rank from like number 1 through 10, I think it will go into top 10 though. Next one is Diamine's Raw Sienna. Now, if I remember this one, I didn't really like this ink that much, I think. I haven't used it that much. That is because it's just like a really boring brown for me for some reason. Let me see if I have a writing. Yeah, this one is a little bit more of like that earthy golden brown ink color. It does have a pretty good like wet flow. It has a moderate drying time. It has a good shading. But I don't know, something about this ink I just don't really like it. I think it's just a little too plain in terms of like brown color. But if you are looking for more of like that earthy, like, you know, sort of like a soil, like sort of like brown color, Raw Sienna is the color for you. Nothing wrong with the ink. I just have so many different inks that it just didn't stand out as much, so that is why. But really good quality ink nonetheless. Okay, next one is Robert Austar's Toffee, and I have a lot to say about this ink. So it almost ranked number 1, but it didn't, only because of Cafe Crema, which I'm gonna talk about next. So this ink, guys, it's really beautiful. I absolutely love how it writes. The shading is absolutely amazing. Let me see if I can show you. As you guys can see, this is the Toffee from Robert Austar. So look how pretty it shades. It has a really good shading. It has high sheen. I really love this ink. The only reason why it's not my number 1 is because of the other ink from Robert Austar. But nonetheless, this is like my top 3 from Robert Austar. I really love how it writes. It's a little bit darker than the one I'm going to talk about next. So let's move on because I want to talk about this one. This is my #1 top favorite ink of all time. This is Rubbert Austar's Cafe Crema. I have ever since I first tried it, I absolutely loved how it wrote. It is my #1 favorite color. Now it looks kind of like a little bit not as pretty in here, but I have to show you. This is how it looks when you write it. So it is a coffee with cream brown ink. It has a medium flow, moderate dry time. It has absolutely amazing shading, you guys, and it has a little bit of a sheen. I first wrote it as green, but I think it's more of like that black. If you see it, it has like a little bit of like the blackish thing that kind of creases around at the edges. So it's really hard to see that black sheen unless you're writing like with a really thick ink. But even so, like even if you don't, like it has amazing shading, you guys. So this is my maze journal, and this is what I used Cafe Crema for the journal right here. So it writes absolutely amazing. It writes so pretty. Look how nice it shades, you guys, and the color is just to die for. I don't know if you guys can see here, but it's like that perfect like coffee cream color. I absolutely love it so much. Oh, my favorite. Okay, next one is Robert Austar's Muddy Sand. Now this one, I think it's that same muddy collection that I was talking about, but this one is that brown color. I would say this Muddy Sand is a little bit more muted, light to medium brown compared to Cafe Crema. So it is a sandy brown ink color. It has a medium flow, moderate dry time. It has a good shading and a little bit of some sheen to it. It does write like this if you guys are interested. So it is really that sandy color, like a kind of muted sand color. So if you are into that kind of color, this is Urban's Terre de Feu. I would say this was kind of like a very muted chocolate brown ink, if I remember it correctly. Let's try it. It's coming out fairly red, but when it dries to that, like, you know, like that brick color, but it's like very muted red brick. Not like the regular red bricks, but the one that has been shone by the sunlight so much that it sort of turned its color to kind of like a diluted red, I would say. It is that kind of brick color. If I'm making sense. Okay, I found the writing sample of it, Terre de Feu. It's Land of Fire brown ink. That's the description. It has a pretty smooth flow, fast dry time, low saturation, good shading, but look at the color, you guys. I am not a huge fan. Like I said, I'm not a fan of like that muted colors when it comes to ink, and this is one of them. Now that it's like dried and it's been a few years, it sort of looks like muted chocolate, like like the milk chocolate, but it's like muted, and that plus a little bit of like purplish even. This is how it looks a few years after, because I got it in 2020, so it's been about 4 years since I wrote this. So yeah, that is the writing sample of that. Alright, you guys, so that is all the medium brown inks that we're going to cover today. There were a few that I absolutely loved in this collection. There were a few that were not really brown, but sort of kind of like in between. So I will show you some of these colors again when we come back for red, but I did wanted to show you those colors because it's kind of like sitting in between red and brown, and also few that are medium to dark brown. So these are more of a medium to dark browns. This is more of like that reddish brown, and this one is your typical like that medium brown color. That's kind of leaning a little bit the light. So since this is the last page, so now we're gonna cover the light brown next time. Now as far as the favorites are concerned, I'm going to tell you right now, even before I do the light browns, because I'm not a really huge fan of light brownings. It just doesn't write dark enough for my liking. I mean, this is sort of like a deadline, I mean, or like a cut line of where I'm comfortable writing, especially with the journal wise. So my number one favorite is the Rubbert Austar's Cafe Crema. I just talked about this. This is the coffee cream color with like amazing shading. My second favorite, like I said, is Diamine Booker. And my third top favorite is actually this one, Rubbert Austar's Golden Brown. This one is very different from the Diamine Golden Brown. It's exactly the same name. I haven't talked about Diamine yet because that one is a very light browning. It has amazing shading, but it's a little bit too light for me. This Rubbert Austar is kind of sits in between like the medium to dark brown. So it's more of like a darker brown, but not like absolutely dark. But it's a fairly good darker brown that I absolutely love. So that is my number 3. That is the medium brown inks. I will be back with the light brown inks hopefully soon, but I will be back with more inks. So we will cover the light browns and then we'll cover like the other colors as well. Since I know blues are pretty popular, I have a lot of different shading inks when it comes to blue, so we'll talk about that when we get there. But thank you guys so much for watching today, and I will see you on my next video. Bye!